Our top focus at this hour, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's former chief advisor Dominic Cummings has come out all guns blazing, taking on his ex-boss for failing to contain the COVID-19 crisis in his opinion. He made the scathing charge while appearing before a joint inquiry of the Health and Social Care Committee and Science and Technology. The lawmakers are now investigating Britain's handling of the pandemic. The United Kingdom has the world's fifth worst official COVID-19 death toll, and Cummings says that Prime Minister Johnson was slow to appreciate the significance of the threat from the virus in early 2020 as it spread from China towards Britain's shores. Cummings apologised to the families of those who died for his own mistakes and the mistakes of the British government.
The truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisers like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this. When the public needed us most, the government failed. And I'd like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that.
Speaking to lawmakers, Cummings said that the Prime Minister was more concerned about the economic damage from the pandemic because he did not think that the virus was a big danger. Cummings also went on to claim that Boris Johnson would have been willing to inject himself with the novel coronavirus as he was so sceptical that COVID-19 was indeed a threat.
The basic thought was that in February the Prime Minister regarded this as just a scare story. He described it as the new swine flu.
Did you tell him it wasn't?
Certainly, but the view of various officials inside Number 10 was if we have the Prime Minister chairing COBRA meetings and he just tells everyone it's swine flu, don't worry about it, I'm going to get Chris Whitty to inject me live on TV with coronavirus so everyone realises it's nothing to be frightened of, that would not help actually serious planning.
An unsparing Cummings, who left the government after falling out with Johnson in the late 2020, says that Britain's Health Minister Matt Hancock should have been fired for lying in government meetings on COVID-19. Johnson has admitted that mistakes were made and that lessons needed to be learned, but his ministers say that they were working at pace in the biggest public health crisis in a century. Johnson has pointed to Britain's vaccination programme as a success that will allow the economy to rebound after and before its peers.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody could accuse this government of being complacent.
After being blasted by his top former advisor on the COVID-19 response, UK's Boris Johnson faced the House of Commons, stressing that the government tried to do its best in fighting the pandemic. Boris Johnson reiterated that none of the decisions were easy and that the handling of the pandemic has been the most difficult thing for the United Kingdom. He also added that all matters will be reviewed in a public inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, the handling of this pandemic has been one of the most difficult things this country has had to do for a very long time. And none of the decisions have been easy. To go into a lockdown is a traumatic thing for a country. To deal with a pandemic on this scale has been appallingly difficult. And we've at every stage tried to minimise loss of life, to save lives, to protect the NHS, and we have followed the best scientific advice that we can, Mr. Speaker. Of course, all those matters will be reviewed in the course of the public inquiry that I have announced.
He also added that the country has turned a corner because of the vaccine rollout. When asked by the opposition leader Keir Starmer on Cummings' claims, Boris refused to engage, saying that the people want the government to get on with the COVID-19 inquiry.
His former advisor. One of the most serious points made this morning is that the Prime Minister failed to recognise the severity of this virus until it was too late, dismissing it as, quote from this morning, another scare story, like the swine flu. Does the Prime Minister recognise that account of his own behaviour? And if so, will he apologise for being so complacent about the threat that this virus posed?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody could credibly accuse this government of being complacent about the threat that this virus posed at any point. We have worked flat out, Mr. Speaker, to minimise loss of life, to protect the NHS, while they have flip-flopped, Mr. Speaker, from one position to another. backing curfew one day, opposing it the next, backing lockdowns one day, opposing it the next, calling for tougher border controls one day, then saying that quarantine is a blunt instrument the next. Mr. Speaker, we have got on with the job of protecting the people of this country from one of the worst pandemics in living memory, if not the worst in living memory. We have turned the corner, and it is no thanks, Mr. Speaker, to the loyal opposition opposite.
For more on the story, WION's London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark is now joining us live on this broadcast from London. Mandy, thanks so much for joining us on this broadcast. Now, at a time when the UK was being praised for its speedy vaccination as well as its reopening, recent remarks from Boris Johnson's former chief advisor have raised a big question mark on his handling of the COVID-19 crisis. How do you assess Johnson's response to the accusations?
I think he had to come out robustly, but it was nothing short of a low.
There are some audio difficulties there. We'll try and get our London Bureau Chief back as quickly as we can. For now, this is our top focus right now, where the top advisor, the former top advisor in Boris Johnson's government, has come out all guns blazing, criticising the Prime Minister's response as well as the British government's response in the handling of the COVID-19 crisis. He made some strong statements there. Dominic Cummings saying that Prime Minister Johnson was slow to appreciate the significance of the threat from the coronavirus in early 2020 as it spread from China towards Britain. And he also apologised to the families of those who lost their lives due to COVID-19 for his own mistakes as well as the mistakes of the British government. Speaking to lawmakers, Cummings recently said that the British Prime Minister was more concerned about the economic fallout from the pandemic than actually saving lives. And he claims that Johnson would have been willing, in fact, to inject himself with the coronavirus because he was so sceptical that it was indeed a major threat in the early days of the outbreak. The British Prime Minister, of course, has responded. A very strong statement again coming in from the British Prime Minister against these accusations. And on that note, let's get our London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark back on this broadcast. Mandy, as I just asked you, how do you assess Boris Johnson's response to these accusations coming from Dominic Cummings?
Well, he tried to defend it as robustly as he could, but really these accusations are explosive in their manner, accusing him point blankly of just not being able and credible to lead the country in a crisis. He said he dismissed it. That led to far more deaths. So the claims have been brutal, takedown, and naked in the way he thinks that Boris Johnson and the government at large completely failed the people of Britain in those early times, not reacting quick enough. He went as far to say that the health secretary lied to the people so many times that he should be sacked.
Right, Mandy, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for all your inputs and thank you for joining us on this broadcast. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.